Thank you, Christopher. I want to say first thank you to TA for hosting us today and to all of our interpreters on the call. This is the OVW Semi-Annual Performance Report Calculating FTEs webinar. My name is Alexa. I'm here with my colleagues Devin and Eliza, and we will be providing the presentation today. Everyone should have received the materials in advance. It is a PowerPoint slide deck, and Eliza is actually able to drop that right into the chat. So if folks want to click that, they can download it. We have it in English and we have it translated in Spanish as well. And we do ask that you use, there's the chat that we are going to be putting resources into, and then there's the Q&A pod that we're going to ask that you put questions into, and we will do our best as the presentation is going to answer your questions as they come in. And we will take some brief pauses and potentially elevate some questions that come into the chat pod to the rest of the group if we feel that they're questions that the rest of you all would benefit from. And I would just like to note that the presentation today is going to be calculating FTEs for discretionary grantees. So if you are a formula grantee, the concepts are basically going to be the same, but you should just be aware that the reporting period length is different. So your FTE calculations would be different, but you are welcome to stay on the call and follow along. Okay. So who are we? We are VAWA MEI, and that is the Violence Against Women Measuring Effectiveness Initiative. And we call ourselves your partners in performance reporting. And we are technical assistance providers, and we are actually also OVW Technical Assistance Grant Program grantees. So we will be reporting this webinar on our JD25 reporting form. So what do? We basically support OVW and grantees with data reporting. One of the ways we do that is providing trainings like these to grantees on different aspects of performance reporting. And we also work with OVW and grantees to sort of showcase the effectiveness and the value of VAWA-funded programs. We are available throughout the reporting period to answer questions. We have resources that we provide for grantees on an ongoing basis. And Devin, we will be providing those to you as we go through this presentation, and we'll be providing you contact information, how to get to us, how to get to folks that you might need to speak to in order to help support you through the reporting process. So today's training plan, we are looking to learn how to calculate FTEs, or to teach you all how to calculate FTEs. We will first, of course, go over what is an FTE. So what does it mean to report on a full-time equivalent staff person? We will be practicing those FTE calculations. So we'll provide some examples and we'll quiz you all on what you think the answers are, go through the explanations for how we got to those calculations. We will review how to access and use a tool that we have created here at VAWA MEI called the FTE Calculator. And then we will go on to review available resources for you all. So supports like who do you call if you have this sort of thing going on, and what kinds of resources are available to you on our website, and show you how to get to all of them. Okay. So the first slide we have here for the staff information section is that, and this actually applies to your grant program across the board to all sections, is that everything that goes on a performance report is asking you to only report activities and staff that are funded under the specific grant and during the current reporting period. So that's something really important to think about as you report entirely throughout your form. The form is only looking for, again, activities and staff time that was supported with the specific grant funds and during the current reporting period. We also ask that you report by activity when you're reporting in the staff section for someone and not their job title. So if you have two staff members, that might fall into two different categories, or if you have one staff member, rather, I should say, that falls into two different categories because they perform two different activities, you would want to split them up on the form. So you may have one person who ends up in multiple categories, and that is how OVW wants you to report. And then we also ask that you report to the second decimal place. So FTEs are reported as either like a 0.52 or a 1.00 or a 1.37. So we're going out to that second decimal point. So you'll just use regular rounding principles and either round up or down based on your calculation. Another thing to note about reporting staff time is that staff time should be prorated if or as necessary. So if someone is part-time or they were hired partway through the reporting period, or if they're a contractor, or say someone at your agency is full-time, but their salary is only partially funded by OVW grant funds, or that specific OVW grant, we would ask that you prorate that staff time, and we will go over what that means as we move through this presentation. And then we have the use of the other category. So most forms, I'll say not all, because there are a few forms that where the grantees do not report individual staff categories. They're required to only report totals. But on the forms that have individual staff categories where you're reporting numbers for like a counselor, a victim advocate, there's also the category of other on the form. And if you do use the category of other, we ask that you be very specific with each entry that you put in. So use descriptors when you're describing the staff function. So don't just say something like consultant, but you might say something like, budget specialist or something like that. So give us a little more information. And then we ask that you specify an FTE number if you're using more than one person in the other category. If it's just one person in the category, then you can report the number in the other box number. But if you're doing multiple people in the box, we ask that you specify the person and then their amount and the person and their amount in the other category. Okay. So we use this slide in this presentation as a reference for folks because calculating FTEs can be done in many different ways, and we just wanted to lay out all the numbers for everyone so that you can use this to reference what you're doing. So aside from the numbers on the slide, I just want to go through a few things about calculating FTEs before we get into what's actually on the screen. So the discretionary grant reporting period is 6 months long. So that is the length of the period. And within a 6-month reporting period, we have 26 weeks. And if you are working full-time, OVW considers a full-time work week to be 40 hours. So if you were to work the full 6-month reporting period at 26 weeks, 40 hours every week, you would work 1,040 possible hours. And so the way that we instruct grantees to calculate FTEs is to add up the amount of hours somebody worked in the reporting period and divide that by the amount of hours that were possible to work in a reporting period. And so if we have that logic in mind, the way we calculate a full-time equivalent staff person is to add up the hours worked in the period, and you can do this by keeping track, and you have a sum at the end of the period if you want to just add hours as you go. Like say you have a consultant and at the end of the period they worked 50 hours. Or if you're someone who works weekly, you can understand that, if I do my 20 hours a week during the reporting period, at the end, I'll have worked X amount of hours. So however you all at your agencies choose to keep track of people's hours, ultimately at the end of the reporting period, you're just going to want to know how many hours did someone work in the period versus how many hours they were able to work. And so knowing that information, we can now look at the numbers that are on the screen. So in order to get a 1.00 FTE, somebody would have to work 40 hours every week for the duration of the period, which is 26 weeks. And if we do 40 hours times 26 weeks, we would get 1,040 hours. So if somebody worked 1,040 hours, we then take that and divide it by the amount of hours that were possible to work in the period. So 1,040 worked, over 1,040 that they could possibly work, we get a 1.00 FTE. And so that's what that first line on this slide is. 1.00 FTE equals 40 hours a week, 1,040 hours in 6 months, 40 hours times 26, and then we get 1.00. And that logic follows if we go down the list. If you were only working 20 hours every week for 26 weeks, it's 20 hours times 26 weeks. It's 520 hours. 520 over 1,040 is a 0.5 FTE. And it goes on down the list. So ultimately, calculating FTEs comes down to knowing how many hours in the period did someone work and how many hours was it possible for them to work. And if you know that, you can divide that and get an FTE. And there are some additional considerations to think about when you're doing this. And some of those are if a person didn't work the entire reporting period, and this is getting into the prorating that I mentioned a few slides ago, that you can be considered full-time and working 40 hours a week, but not be reported on the form as a 1.0 FTE if you didn't work the entire length of the reporting period. So if somebody worked only 3 months out of the reporting period, but they were full-time, you can do the calculation of how many hours they worked in the period over how many hours that were available, and that gets their prorated number. So it would be half of the 1,040 would be, what is it, 520 over 1,040 gets the 0.5. So that's prorating FTEs. Additionally, if somebody did not have their funds, their salary 100% covered by the grant, but they worked full-time during the reporting period, you would have to figure out how much of their salary was covered. So if someone's full-time and they would be a 1.00 FTE, but say only 75% of their salary is covered, you then have to knock that FTE down to only 75%. So there are different ways that you can calculate and add up the FTE totals, but then you have to take into consideration if somebody was fully funded under the grant or if they only worked part-time under the grant. And if you have people that work outside of your agency and they are not like in your agency, but say you have an MOU partner or having a consultant or anyone outside your agency, if they are funded with this grant, they count as staff FTEs that you need to report on the form. So that I just want to make a note that it's any funds that support any staff time anywhere. So either nested in your agency or even outside your agency, a consultant or a partner. If they are being funded with the grant, you want to report them on the form like and as if they are staff at your agency.
Thank you very much, Alexa, for walking us through all of those principles. We did get a question in the chat asking to repeat part, but I'm going to move us through the examples. And if you're still wondering about a piece, is something still unclear, please ask specifically what part it is you're hoping to have us elaborate on, because I missed exactly which part you asked us to repeat. I
Devin,
see. Yep.
We actually just got some questions in the chat that talk about leave time and vacation and sick time. And what we'll say about that is if you're funded under a grant and you're a person like, say, for example, me, I work at the university and I have like within my salary, sick time and vacation that I'm paid for. I would be able to include that time, like my PTO and my sick time, as funded by the grant because it's part of my employment at the university. And I know that every agency would potentially be different in the way they treat those things, but if it's like part of your job and you have vacation and sick time and all that stuff included, that can be considered as time worked. So yes, I would include those hours in your FTE calculations. And Devin, I don't know if you would have anything that you would want to add to that.
Sorry for the delay. I couldn't find the unmute button for a second there. No, I think that that should cover it, and basically whatever percentage a person's salary is covered, like full scope of their time is what you should include. And I'll just say again, hopefully the examples help, and certainly if they don't, continue to ask us questions. So our first example, let's say that you are a university receiving an OVW grant. So in this first example, your grant is intended to cover a full-time counselor whose salary is 75% funded by the grant, and another full-time counselor whose salary is 15% funded by the grant. So this is an example of that portion of salary or portion of time covered with the grant that Alexa was talking about. So you have one person who's completely full-time, but only 75% of their total pay is being supported with grant funding. And then another person who's also full-time in the same role of counselor, but their salary is only 15% funded by the grant. So here you only want to consider the portions of their time that are directly covered by the grant when you're figuring out what their FTEs are. So in a lot of cases, you'll want to calculate the FTE for each, individual person, because that's who that's how you'll look at the time paid with grant funds and the time worked. But in this case, we're assuming that they worked the entire 6-month reporting period. But because they're reporting in the same category, you're actually going to take those two FTEs and add them together to get your total counselor FTE for this OVW grant that you're reporting. Now, we do have a tool that will help with this, which Alexa will walk you through. If this feels very daunting, know that there is a whole great workbook that Alexa and some of our other colleagues have made, and they've taken a lot of the technological issues out of this, but hopefully this example will help clarify. So you're going to need to take both people and add their time covered by the grant together. If you want to use the chat to guess, well, hopefully it's not a guess, to answer what you think the correct answer is, what do you think the correct FTE under counselor you'll be reporting is? I'm trying to get to the answer. Thank you all so much for participating. Here we go. In this case, the answer is A, which I see many of you said, because you would report those two folks, one at 75% and one at 15%. And since they did work full time, you can take them as straight, it's 0.75 for the person who's 75% funded, and the person that's 15% funded, their time is 0.15. So you add them together and you will be reporting 0.90 under the counselor category, because you're only reporting the OVW grant funded portion of their time. But they are full-time and they did work the full 6 months. Now we will have other examples of prorating. In our second example, your organization's OVW program grant was used to fund a part-time trainer. This trainer spends 6 hours per week providing trainings and then 4 hours per week completing support staff tasks around the office. Again, for our example, we're going to assume that they worked the full 6 months at the same pace of 6 hours a week doing trainings and 4 hours a week completing support staff tasks. Now, this brings two different principles into the calculation, one of which is obviously capturing the time as an FTE, and the other principle of reporting under the staff function, not job title. So are you reporting 0.25 support staff, 0.6 trainer educator, and 0.4 support staff, or 0.15 trainer and 0.1 support staff? Now, from all those different options of how to calculate that Alexa gave you just before, you'll probably be thinking about the easiest way to do this is to take that 6 hours in a week and divide it by the 40 hours available in a week to get the FTE for the trainer category. And I'm slightly giving this away to say that you will separately be reporting under the support staff for the other 4 hours. And I see a lot of folks answering in, oh, sorry, I went too far. Can I go back this way? There we go. In this case, as I see nearly everyone put into the chat, the correct answer is C. The FTE for trainer educator would be 0.15, taking that 6 divided by 40, and support staff would be 0.1, taking that 4 out of 40 hours available a week. You could also, if you wanted, multiply the 6 hours by the 26 weeks in the period and divide that total by 1,040, but it's the same ratio. It's the same math, just doing it a little bit differently. But that can be a good tip if you know that someone started, say, 2 weeks late or something like, or 2 weeks into the reporting period. Okay, in our next example, your organization used its OVW program grant to fund a full-time counseling position. The counselor was hired 2 months into the reporting period. So this is pulling in that principle of only including the period of time that they worked in the current reporting period's progress report. So your choices are 0.33 counselor, 0.67 counselor, or 1 counselor. I'll pause while people put their answers in. This is using that principle of the portion of the reporting period that you need to prorate down. Anything less than the full 6 months will need to be prorated down from 1. Again, I'm partially giving the answer away. So the easiest way to do this is to divide that 4 months that was worked at the full-time rate by the 6 months available in the reporting period. So in this case, the correct answer is B, 0.67. Now I have seen the chat moving a lot. Alexa, are there any questions bubbling up that we should address out loud before continuing through the examples? No? Great.
Sorry, Devin. I think when we share the screen, we fight over the mouse sometimes. I haven't seen anything. I'm scrolling back up through since we had people put answers in the chat. There was one person who said, when I prorated time for an FTE since only worked 1 month out of the period, the system flags that it should total 100%. And I'm not certain what that question is getting at. And I would just want to ask if that person wants to put their question in the Q&A pod, we can chat back and forth with you more in depth about that. And when I did the example in number 3, the VAWA MEI form flagged it as red. So again, I'll say if people are having individual problems with anything that they're putting into their forms, if you want to chat us in the Q&A pod, we're happy to chat with that. And you will also be provided our contact information at the end of the webinar, and you can contact us directly because we do offer one-on-one technical assistance on how to calculate FTEs if you're having difficulty entering data into the impact tool. So that's all I wanted to say about what I was seeing, Devin, in the chat there. And I just want to say that there are so many different ways that the math can work out in calculating FTEs. Like you can do 4 months out of 6 months and get the prorated number for if somebody didn't work the whole reporting period, but they would have had to have worked 40 hours the entire period for that specific math to work out. And so, our examples show the many different ways that you can get to these numbers, but ultimately you want to just understand and know how many hours did somebody work in the period and how many hours were available for them to work. And then you get that number, and then you can say, okay, and then did they work the entire period, yes or no? And if they didn't, then you have to pull it back in terms of like, okay, if I only worked 1 month, that's 1/6 of the reporting period. So you would have to take 1/6 of the number that you calculated. So, you know, we do have an FTE calculator that we will be providing for you all that does all of this for you if you just enter the data it asks for. So we do have tools to support you in this if you want to do it on your own. And then we do have, live people on the phone, email, or Zoom that will work through this with you if it's still not making sense. And or if you're having difficulty in the impact tool with validations, or if something's coming up red and it's not letting you continue in the form, we're available to help with that as well. So I just want to let everyone know that, you do have support and you do have help, because this is a bit of a kind of an odd thing to have to do. And I will just also say that one of the reasons that OEW asks grantees to calculate FTEs as opposed to just reporting like, oh, we have, Devin's the victim advocate and Alexis the counselor, so we have one victim advocate and one counselor. They ask for FTEs because it's not an apples to apples comparison, because like we said, there are different factors at play here. I could have be the counselor at the agency, but I only worked 1 month, and Devin's the victim advocate and she worked all 6 months. So like it's not a one-to-one reporting comparison. On the form, I would not be reported as a 1.0 FTE, but Devin would be. And so ultimately, OVW is looking for a more accurate accounting and reporting of what the funds are supporting. And then beyond that, when they aggregate or compile data from grantees across the board for a program, the best and most accurate way to put all that data together is to be sure that everyone is counting and calculating FTEs in the same way. And so that's sort of why you have to jump through the hoops, or, run over these hurdles and do this sort of Herculean calculation, because there is the accuracy and integrity of being able to like calculate and understand what the funds are supporting accurately, is if we have everybody do it this way. So there is a reason, and your hard work is appreciated, but it does seem a little odd unless you do it over and over again, and you will get better at it as you have to do it, and you will get more familiar with the ways in which you have to kind of keep track of people's hours as the reporting periods keep happening. Okay, and so we like to go over common staff reporting discrepancies. So while you're reporting staff FTEs, if you are calculating FTEs and you're like getting numbers like, 10 or even 5, those are considered high numbers in the staff section. We normally see, between a 0.01 FTE and like a 1.5 per category, and then staff totals of maybe like 3 or 4, and that can actually even be high for a total. Now, if your agency has high numbers, that is okay. Some grants are much larger than others, so I'm not saying you can't have high numbers, but high numbers are a discrepancy in a single category for your program manager as they review your form. And then for us at VAWA MEI, when we review the data, we notice when there are high numbers reported, and we look into that. Another sort of discrepancy that we see is when the staff are not reported by their job function. So for example, you may have someone who at your agency is supported with the funds to do training, and then they're also the program coordinator. And we see that you reported a program coordinator, and we also see that you reported training on your form. So you reported in the training section if your form has that. But if we don't see that you reported both a program coordinator and a trainer FTE on your form in the staff section, we would look into that, and you might hear from us and we might say, hey, did you mean to do that, or did you mean to split that person's time? So you want to think about people's job functions at your agency as you're reporting them on the form. Another thing that we see is that FTEs have not been prorated by hire date or the approval of your budget and receipt of your funds. So sometimes folks start partway through the period, and we talked about that. And so you would want to prorate them for how long they have been working. And sometimes grantees actually haven't received their funds until partway through the period. So you were not using anything until the budget was approved, you received the funds, and maybe you only had a month left in the reporting period. And you write that in your performance report. But then when we look in your staff section, we see like full-time equivalent staff numbers, like a 1.0 reported, and then we'll know that there's a discrepancy there. So you want to make sure that you're connecting sort of, those dots in terms of how long someone worked in the period, or if your budget was approved partway through and you didn't receive the funds. And there are a number of other things that can come up in the staff section, and we don't necessarily cover them all here. So if you're seeing something that we haven't mentioned, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to discuss with you and kind of work through your particular situation at your agency on how you should be reporting. And so we do provide a number of resources. Our website, vawamei.org, hosts any number of things, reporting forms, the links to your reporting forms. We have FAQs on various topics, not just staff FTEs, but specifically in this webinar, we're going to point out that we have a frequently asked questions document about staff and calculating FTEs. We actually have an e-learning video. I think it's like a 4 or 5 minute video that walks grantees through reporting FTEs. So it's similar content to what we're going over today, just kind of offered in a different learning style. And then we also have the FTE calculator that we're talking about right now. And we are going to be going into that. And I'm going to be doing a live demonstration of the calculator. So I will unshare my screen here to the PowerPoint and share my screen to the FTE calculator. So please give me a moment to do that. Okay, Devin, you want to give me a thumbs up to the FTE calculator? Okay, so on our website, if you follow the link that I believe Elisa has put into the chat and is in this PowerPoint presentation, you will find a file called the FTE calculator that you can download. And it is an Excel file that we here at VAWA MEI created to be a calculator for FTEs for discretionary grant programs. We also have one for STOP and SASP. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the calculations for STOP and SASP or formula programs are a bit different because the reporting period is not 6 months, it's 12 months. So there's a difference there. So we do have calculators for both STOP and SASP. And this is something that we recommend grantees download at the beginning of every reporting period. Get a fresh copy from our website, save it to your desktop, open it up. And what you'll see when you open it up is a tab for the calculator and a tab for the FAQs. So this is a similar information as to the FAQ document that's on our website. It also has our contact information in it so that you can call or email us if you're having trouble. And then we basically just have a step-by-step form here for you to input data and then to off to the right side get the staff list for your grant program. And so the calculator says, follow the steps and answer the questions in order beginning with step 1. If you need to go back a few steps, be sure to delete any information beyond the step you go back to. This will ensure that the calculator functions correctly. And so if you're worried about anything because you're not that familiar with Excel, I just want to let you know that these cells have been locked. So like if I try to click in a box and hit the delete button, it's going to say the cell you're trying to change is a protected sheet. So we tried our best to make it sort of like goof proof and foolproof so that you can't really mess any of the sort of like back end formulas up. And basically you just have to follow the directions and hopefully, you get the output that you need for your form. And so I'll walk us through some examples of using the calculator here. So step one says select your grant program from the drop-down list. So it says click this box, then click the arrow for the drop-down menu. So all the drop-down menus are going to be like a little caret next to a box, and you're going to be able to select from a list. Let's see, I think one of my favorite programs is Legal Assistance for Victims because I work on it a lot. So now that I've selected my program, it says step two, enter the total available hours in your program's work week. The default here is 40. And so if your agency happens to have a work week that's say 35 hours, you would actually be able to just click into the box and type your work, my num blocks, type your work week in there, and then the calculator will adjust as necessary. So that's step two. Step three, enter the name of the staff member whose time was supported by the OVW grant funds in the table below. Enter one staff member per box. So I'll do me, and then I will do my colleague Devin. And so for me, enter the number of months during the 6-month reporting period that the staff member's position was paid with the grant funds. Months can be input out to 2 decimal points. So you can do like it was 1.5 months, you could do 1.50. I'll do, let's say I worked for 6 months and Devin was hired partway through the period. So she's 3 months. And then step 5 is telling us to use the drop-down lists to select the function the staff member performed while supported with your OVW grant funds during the period. If this person performed in multiple roles, please use additional cells below to select all functions that apply. So this is allowing you to break out a person's job functions. So let's say during the reporting period, I was the administrator of my program, but I was also a trainer in my program. So I have selected my functions, and then we have a drop-down list for the method that you're using to report the time. So we have 3 different methods that we have allowed for in the calculator, and it's calculating by the number of hours worked per week, or the total hours worked in the period, or the percent of time. And we ask that percent of time be entered as a whole number without the percent sign. And so the way the calculator is set up, you do have to calculate the same way for one person if you're using them on the same row. So like I couldn't calculate my administrator time as hours worked per week and my trainer time as hours worked in the period. I have to do it as the same. So I work full time, and I'm going to say my hours worked per week, and I do 40 hours. And as soon as I enter the amount of hours worked in the period, I look over and my FTE becomes a 1.00 FTE. And then say I only work, now actually I should have done this since I'm splitting myself up. I don't want to work overtime. So I do 20 hours as an administrator. So that's a 0.5 FTE, and 20 hours as a trainer. And then if we look down on our list, actually LAV no longer has a trainer. That's my bad. Let's do attorney. Attorney, 0.5 FTE. So the drop-down lists that are in the FTE calculator are all of the jobs that are available across the board for discretionary grant programs. So you have to select only the staff functions that are in your program, and the program lists are over here. So as soon as you select a program, your list will show up here, and you can only, report on the impact tool for the categories that your form has. Even if the FTE calculator shows, like there are SANEs on this list, but I think LAV doesn't fund that, so that's not on this list, but it would be in the drop-down list. So that's just a little quirk about the FTE calculator. And now let's go and report. Let's say Devin was LAV has a counselor, and we're going to report Devin's time by total hours worked in the period. So she had a lump sum of, let's say, 800 hours during the period. And I can put in her total hours that she worked, and I got a 0.77 counselor. And say we go down the list and we're adding in Eliza. Let's get her name right. She was 6 months in the period. She was also a counselor. And I know that she worked 40 hours every week as a counselor. Now, what the FTE calculator did here was add in Eliza's time as a 1.0 FTE to Devin's time as a counselor and got 1.77. And so if those are all the staff that I have at my agency supported with the grant funds, I can look at the bottom here. I have my total, and I can take these numbers and I can log into the impact tool and I can report my FTEs. And say you're like, oh, I messed up and I want to go back, or I need to do it for a different program. We ask that you delete all the information, go backwards and hit the delete button for everything that you've put in and go backwards, and then go back and select a new program. And the calculator is set so that if there are numbers and such over here and things that you've selected, it will not let you select a new program until you've actually removed all of the data from here and then select a new program, because it will automatically bump a new list off to the side for that program. And so that is the FTE calculator. And if you're ever using it and you're looking at the screen and it looks a little wonky, we do note that computer display sizes vary widely. So you can use the little zoom at the bottom of Excel to get the whole screen in, and you can zoom in if, say, the boxes are very small for some people. You have the adjustability of the zoom on there to see the calculator a little bit more clearly. So I will stop my share and get the PowerPoint back going. Okay, Devin, to you.
Thank you, Alexa. As we're wrapping up our explanation of how to report your staff time, we want to remind everyone of the other resources available to you as you go into performance reporting. So if you have any questions or need technical support with your Just Grants account, please reach out to Just Grants directly. This would be anything like you don't see where to submit your performance report once you've downloaded it out of the VAWA impact tool, or if you can't get into your account to upload that performance report PDF, which is what you need to do by July 30th. Anything like that related to Just Grants issues, please reach out to them. This is their phone and their email, and they have
We may have lost Devin. Oh, there she is.
I'm disconnected for a moment.
Oh, you're back.
Wonderful. Not sure how much you missed, but for Just Grants issues, they also have demonstration videos on their website that will show you how to navigate your portal and things like that. May I please have the next slide? Thank you, Alexa. If you need to verify grant-supported activities, or if you need approval for any products that you created with your grant funds, please reach out to your OVW grant manager. Additionally, if you need to submit your performance report, if you are unable to submit your performance report by the deadline, that's something you will want to let your grant manager know as soon as possible. And so you should already have their direct contact information, but if you need help, reach out to OVW at the phone number here, and they will connect you to your grant manager and the person that will be approving all of your products and verifying your grant funded activities. May I have the next slide? Thank you, Alexa. And then finally, if you are looking for any technical or logistical help using the impact tool to complete your performance report, if you have any questions about the content on the reporting form, such as how to answer a question or If you want to talk through how your grant funded activities are best represented in the questions available, like if you're not sure where to put something, please reach out to us at VAWA MEI. We are always available for one-on-one technical assistance via email, phone, or Zoom, whatever's easiest for you. And you can call and leave a message, or you can send us an email, which is really the fastest way to get to us, because we always have someone watching the email. I mean, except overnight Eastern time, but
Don't overpromise.
and that brings us to the conclusion of our materials.
And I
Does
wanted to
anyone
jump
have?
in
Oh
real
yeah.
quick, Devin. And I forgot to mention when I was going over the FTE calculator is that that was put together a number of years ago and does not include some of our newer special initiative programs, and also does not accommodate for the coalitions programs or the TA program that do not have individual staff categories to report on their form, but report totals. And we are in the process of redoing the FTE calculator to make it a more universal tool for all of our grantees, all the programs, and all the ways that folks report staff. So in the meantime, if you don't see your program, just use the calculator, pick a random program and see if it has the categories you're looking for, and you can calculate that way. It doesn't really matter the categories you pick as long as you've got, as long as you're inputting the data correctly, you can then translate that data into the impact tool into the correct categories that are on your form. So I just wanted to point that out to folks.
I also just quickly wanted to jump in that there is still an open question in the Q&A box. And that's Ines asking, we have a consultant whose invoice is based on the task performed and not on the hours worked, and asking what they should do. And this is one of the questions that I would probably recommend seeing if there's like a general set number of hours that a task takes, and then use that to calculate it. But I also wanted to see if Alexa, Devin wanted to chime in with a potential different solution.
I would say that if you're unsure about what the amount paid with grant funds represents, to speak with your grant manager, because at the end of the day, that's the person who will be looking at both your financial reports and your performance reports. And so you really want them to be able to understand it and approve the way what was done with grant funds is reflected on your performance report. It never hurts to check in with them, especially when it comes to statutory, fulfilling your statutory obligations to report your grant funded activities.
And that's it from the Q&A box for now.
Okay, and I had, I can't see your full name, but there was someone who said example 3 and 4 was confusing to me, and I figured since we had some time here at the end, we could go through that really quickly, so I brought it back up on the screen here. And staff example number 3 says your organization used its OVW program grant funds or grant to fund a full-time counseling position. The counselor was hired 2 months into the period. What FTE would you report? So we have a few things going on here. It says it's full-time, so that indicates to me a 40-hour work week, right? If that's what is full-time in your organization. And then I have another piece of the puzzle that says the counselor was hired 2 months into the reporting period. So that means this person worked for 4 months only, because the reporting period is 6 months. So, and I have my calculator here on my phone because I have to do this every time. If we're doing the calculations without the FTE calculator, if you want to use the Excel sheet, you could basically input all this information, go across the boxes. Alexa, she worked 4 months. She was a counselor. She worked 40 hours every week. and boom, that would give you the exact answer to this conundrum. But if we're calculating by hand, we can say, okay, if somebody worked for what did I say? It was 4 months. 4 months is how many weeks? 16 weeks in the reporting period. And if every month somebody worked 40 hours a week, so I can do the 16 weeks times 40 hours. So I have now figured out how many hours this counselor did in fact work during the reporting period. So I can take that number and divide it by 1040, and I can get my 0.6. It actually looks a little bit less than 0.67 because I think the amount of weeks isn't always like a one-to-one, depending on what month you had in the period, because some of them are a little bit more than 4. But we get the answer B. The FTE for counselor is a 0.67 FTE. And then the way we showed this on the answer is doing 4 divided by 6. So 4 out of 6 months. Somebody worked 4 out of the possible 6 months that were in the period, which equals a 0.67 FTE. So you're always going to want to think in the, yeah, you got 0.62 as well. That's exactly right. Because if you do the calculation in counting the weeks and adding up the hours, it becomes a little less than if you just do 4 over 6. And there are little discrepancies in calculating FTEs because of that, in those specific ways that people choose to calculate and report their FTEs. And what we ask and what we really sort of like instruct grantees to do is just to be consistent in the way that you choose to calculate your FTEs, so that across the board, all of your calculations are accurate when put up against each other. And sometimes there's a difference between maybe like one agency does it this way and one this way, but as long as you have your records and you do it consistently, that's an appropriate way to calculate FTEs. And then example 4, your OVW program grant paid a translator for 65 hours. So again, we know it's how many hours that were possible to work over how many hours that you could have worked in the period. So we're doing 65 over 1040, and I'm guessing that it comes out to be a 0.06 translator. We'll check the math on our slides. 0.06. Yep, so that's a 0.06 FTE. And so we just always want to remember what was worked versus what was possible to have worked. And that's sort of the numerator denominator of that calculation. Okay. And then there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in. We do have a few minutes, but if we don't see anything and nobody gives us anything else in the Q&A pod, we'll probably shut it down. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions you want to get into further, please reach out to us for one-on-one today. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, different TAs. Thank you for helping us.